Welcome everyone. I'm Emma Smale, Head of Practice and Policy at the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory. We recently welcomed professionals from across the family justice system and local authorities to join us in a webinar about peer-parent advocacy, an approach which gives parents a stronger voice in decision-making and seeks to improve relationships between professionals and families. We were joined by Dr. Clive Diaz, Professor of Social Work at Swansea University, who presented research from the university's valuation, which examined parental advocacy services from across local authority sites in the UK and in Ireland. We were also joined by three professionals who have different experiences of peer-parent advocacy. They share their perspectives on the approach and the importance of listening to parents' voices and involving them in decision-making. Tim Fisher has 20 years experience in social work and 10 years experience as a local authority manager. He developed peer parental advocacy with Camden Local Authority, Telford and Wrekin, and now Redbridge Council, with his organisation, the Relational Activism Group. Carmen O is a lived experience parent advocate. She works on research projects with various universities and organisations, and also works independently with local authorities and other organisations to promote relationship-based, rights-based and strength-based approaches through co-design and meaningful participation. Louise Spragg is a principal social worker and strategic lead for practice at Telford and Wrekin's Children's Services. She is passionate about co-production and hearing from people who experience services to influence meaningful change. We had a lively discussion including questions that were sent to us in advance and on the day. And we are grateful to everyone who took part, and we hope that you find the following highlights from the event insightful.
Okay, so I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about research we've done on parent advocacy in the UK and Ireland. Our studies have been what we call realist informed, which means we explore how and why parental advocacy services in England, Wales and Ireland support parents navigating the child protection system. We try to understand how parent advocacy services can potentially empower parents and give them more of a voice in decision making. Now, why we see this as important is, going back 15, 16 years ago, we did some research where we interviewed parents and children about their experience of the child protection system. And there've been previous studies and research on this, and it's evident from all the research really that parents find the child protection system to be very intimidating, very oppressive. They don't feel able to participate meaningfully in decision makings. They find child protection conferences particularly difficult. And there's been some research from the States in particular that had shown that parent advocacy can help improve parents' experiences and make it, less intimidating and less oppressive. So that led us to look at doing studies around parent advocacy. Again, just a bit more on the context. When we did the research, this is going back 10 years ago, with parents, we interviewed 52 parents across 2 local authorities, asking them about their experiences of child protection conferences and social work involvement. And we found that they were pretty much all of them had negative views of the conferences. They felt intimidated, they felt tearful, they felt stressed and angry. One of the mothers, for example, said, I was worn out, it was traumatic. I felt like I was being putting in the corner. So, again, this highlights why we need to look at other ways of making the child protection system less oppressive for parents and engage them more meaningfully in decision making. I want to just give a brief definition of parent advocacy. Now, David Tobis has done a lot of research on parent advocacy. He helped set parent advocacy up in the USA many years ago in New York, and he did a review of the key literature on this topic a few years ago, and this was the definition him and colleagues came up with. It says parent advocacy is a form of peer advocacy where parents who themselves have had experience of the child welfare system help other parents involved to navigate it. In addition, they may also help to develop strategies to change the system. So a lot of the work we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to be talking about is case advocacy, but there is system advocacy. Particularly, we're going to hear about Telford, where parent advocates are helping with training social workers, interviewing social workers, interviewing directors, teaching social work students at universities. I'm going to report back on our research across Ireland, Wales, and England today. We're doing what's called a realist informed study. So we start by doing sort of reviews of the literature, scoping reviews, narrative reviews. We develop what's called initial program theory, a theory of how parent advocacy works. And then we do interviews and focus groups, workshops, and observations of child protection conferences, both with advocates and without advocates, to sort of test and refine and change this program theory. We've done interviews with probably over 150 parents and social workers and senior leaders across England and Wales and Ireland. So we've got a very large sample of people we've spoken to, and we're doing increasing numbers of observations that are really interesting. And if we look at all the data we've got, three key themes sort of jump out from all our data. The first one is that most participants, social workers, senior managers, parents, parent advocates, felt that parent advocacy had a positive impact on parents' experience of the system. The second one is parent advocacy seemed to improve parents and social workers' relationships and helped with building trust and rebalancing power relations. And that's particularly critical during the child protection process, when what we see in our research that I've touched on already is that they can become a very adversarial relationship at a very difficult time, when often there's been an incident and there's a lot of concerns for the children. The parents feel under a lot of pressure and being attacked by the different agencies. The Child Protection Conference, like I've said, is particularly difficult. So having someone there and helping to act as a bridge between the parents and the social workers is really important, because if it gets into a very adversarial relationship, then it's less likely that parents are going to be honest with social workers. It could lead to social workers being more critical and taking more adversarial action, and it just doesn't really work for anyone. So that we feel that's really important, that acting as a bridge, that helping build trust and rebalancing power relations. The third theme is parent advocacy particularly seemed to help ensure parents were more involved in decision making when child protection authorities were involved. They had the advocate there at the child protection conference. They felt able to explain their views. They could talk through the advocate if they wanted to. Another real key element which ties in with this is that often I used to chair child protection conferences, and because these are such difficult experiences, parents feel really criticized by all the professionals in the room. Often what this having someone next to them really helped in terms of them being able to say, sometimes the parent advocate would say, let's take 10 minutes, let's take a 10-minute break. Whereas if parents are there on their own, they're more likely to find the experience, very difficult, potentially get angry, get upset, maybe leave the meeting. And the problem is, if they do get emotionally upset, angry, storm out, shout at the social worker, shout at the chair, that will then be used against them. I don't feel that the system acknowledges quite how difficult this process is for parents, and they end up being criticized for what I would say is actually a natural response to being to having to go through that process. So those are the three key themes. I'm going to go into them in a bit more depth. This is the first one, the impact on parents. My advocate has changed my relationship with social services because I learned how to express myself to social workers. Such an important point. Being able to express yourself, not getting so angry, being able to deal with things in a more considered way, which then reduce the risks of things escalating and that their behavior or their actions being used against them. Advocacy helped parents express their views, felt more supported and less isolated. Very importantly, improve their understanding of the process and of their rights. Also, social workers, we found, were more likely to listen to parents' perspectives and understand parents' perspectives because they were hearing it from someone who was calm, or through the advocate, they could see the perspective better. And I really like this quote from a parent in one of the areas we did our research. My advocate has been my rock, which makes me feel more comfortable and confident, as I know she's there supporting me and helping me along the way. Second one is the impact on social work practice. So it improves the parent-social work relationship for the reasons I've already talked about. The social worker sees a better engagement from parents. So again, they're less likely to escalate the situation. Better communication between the two parties. We get to a point where parents will be able to be more honest and acknowledge that they're really struggling with things. And it changed the dynamic. This is a quote from a social worker. Having an advocate in meetings helps to change the dynamics. Parents are less defensive and more engaged. So again, this is a real positive we see. So different organizations and different local authorities have set up parent advocacy in quite different ways. One of the two main different ways is some have set it up very much that it's a group of parents doing advocacy who've got experience of the child protection system themselves going back 5, 10 years, whereas then there's other places where they've developed it. Parents could become advocates, but they don't have to be to become an advocate. It could be that someone's worked as a child advocate or done a totally different job, and then they've done formal qualifications, as indeed the peer advocates have done, and they go and act as advocates. We tend to feel that the peer model is stronger and better ideally, but it is more complex. The reason we feel it's better and stronger is because it enables what parents tell us is it's nice to have someone alongside them in the child protection conference or the difficult meeting who's been through it themselves and who really understands it. However, there is risks attached, issues around vicarious trauma, bringing things up for them that they may not have, is uncomfortable and very difficult for parents. So it's a complex one, but there's essentially these two different ways in which it's been implemented in different places. So there are implementation challenges. There's no doubt about that. And we've seen that in some of the local authorities we've done research in. There's issues around power imbalances, ongoing. Having an advocate doesn't change all that. You've still got 12, 13 professionals in the room for the initial child protection conference, potentially. Doesn't alter that completely, but it does help in some ways. We've seen in some of our sites, there's sort of role clarity and boundaries can be an issue. Parent advocates asked to do things that, isn't their role, like a family support worker or almost act as a lawyer. That can be a problem. There's issues around sustainability and long-term funding. A lot of projects just have small amounts of funding and a short-term. Challenges around training and supervision, particularly for the peer model. These are people who themselves have been through the child protection process. So it's really important they need, going back 5, 10 years ago, but it could happen that they'd be triggered by going to a child protection conference, going back to their own memories. So it's really important that they get proper training, proper supervision. And then finally, system resistance. Now, most of the social workers we interview and speak to are very positive about parent advocacy, but there are some parents we know. We did an article recently in Community Care and they did a survey and it was quite a high response rate of over 1,000 social workers, and about 20% of them said that they didn't feel parent advocacy was a good idea because it would lead to a move away of a focus on the child, and that there'd be too much focus on the parent. Now, we've struggled to find social workers who've said that in interviews. Sometimes when we first started out in local authorities, there have been those views given, but we need to find out more about that perspective and that viewpoint. But overall, we found in our study that parental advocacy, really strengthens parent engagement and voice. And if there could be long-term funding, meaningful supervision, clarity around boundaries, this intervention could make a real difference for parents, and indeed generally make the system less adversarial. Could even, I think we've seen social workers say, my role is easier, I enjoy it. I feel I'm able to work with families better if there's a parent advocate involved. So overall, what we've seen is, like I've said, it empowers parents, it builds confidence and strengthens their involvement in decision making. They're much clearer. They could be given a 20-page report, and they're clear now about the complex language. The advocate can go through it with them, take time with them. Interestingly, linked to that is often parents will tell us that social workers treat them much better and are much more polite and respectful when they've got their advocate there with them during home visits or meetings. That's a really interesting finding that we need to look into more. Like I've already said, it improves the communication. It helps break down barriers and mistrust and fear that a lot of parents whose children are going through the child protection process fear and have. That's, I feel, a very natural response. When we look at the rates of children subject to a child protection plan and in care, they're 12 to 13 times more likely to come from the poorest 10th centile. So there are certain areas of England and Wales where the numbers of children with a social worker are quite high, and there's lots of mistrust and fear in those areas and concerns that social workers are going to come and remove their children. We've even heard parents say to us in focus groups and interviews, I think social workers get a bonus if they remove children. Now, of course, that's not true, but that's the perception that's there. So with a parent advocate alongside explaining that actually the social worker wants to keep the family together. They don't want to go and remove lots of children. That can really break down the mistrust and fear. Actually, on both sides, it can also help the social worker understand why the parents feeling the way they are, excuse me, and what they've gone through. Then finally, building trust and understanding. So when parents feel supported, they engage more openly, they ask for the help they need, they're honest about what they're struggling with, and it can make a real difference. So this is what we call a logic model, which sort of explains the parent advocacy in some depth. I'm not going to go through this, you'll see this very small on your screen. I'm not going to go through this in a great deal of depth, but you can read our papers and our articles which discuss this in more depth. We've got the contextual factors, the oppressive nature of the child protection system. It's no individual's fault. It's inevitable. If a social worker is investigating whether a child's been injured or is at risk of significant harm, that's going to be a difficult experience for everyone. Then you've got the mechanism resource, what the advocates do, what they can provide. And that's a mixture of support and guidance, helping parents understand this very complex terminology, helping debunk those myths and fears that I mentioned. That in turn leads to the mechanism response, which is trust, more open, non-judgmental relationships, less adversarial relationships, which in turn then leads to the anticipated and genuine outcome of improved parent and professional collaboration, improves service delivery, parents feel more involved, and there's more sense of power sharing, which all round is a very positive thing that we should be looking for in our work. So this is the final sort of slide explaining how it works. The parent, through the support of the advocate, feels safe, they feel informed, they feel respected. The advocate models trust and empathy and non-judgment. And that's helpful for both the social worker and for the parent. And then the system is showing an ability to be flexible. It's less of an us and them. It's more, we're all in, for want of a better word, we're all in this together. We want to make things better for families. We want to make things safe for children. We want parents to feel respected and that they're, part of the decisions being made. And here we see genuine participation and hopefully genuine culture change within the child welfare system. So some final conclusions. We know the child protection services are complex, they're very challenging. Social workers have very high caseloads. Parents find them often very difficult, oppressive at times. This power imbalance has a real impact. These very formal meetings, scary meetings for parents. The peer advocacy and the parent advocacy model offers this emotional and practical support, which in turn helps parents navigate this incredibly difficult process with greater confidence. And what we feel is that this parent advocacy model can help to make the child protection process more accessible, more inclusive. It gives people more sense of rights. And ultimately, we're seeing research from the States, it's led to reduced numbers of children going into care, better rates of reunification. So we feel it really can be potentially transformative. Thank you very much.
The way the threads of peer advocacy came through for me, maybe it's three areas. The first area was the community work that I did as a manager in Camden Council, and I'll unpack that a little bit in a moment. The second area was the international examples that we have and that we can learn from in the UK, and those are in America. A number of places in America have developed peer parental advocacy. New York is perhaps the most famous example, and I think Clive talks about that in his presentation. And there's an academic in the UK called Jerry Damin, who's done a lot of work with parents and others in America. And we learned early on from Jerry and also from the New York example and David Tobis. And so we were inspired by that in developing our work. And then the third area is parents with lived experience that set up as independents outside of local authorities to develop peer advocacy support. And there's some brilliant examples of that. And we allied with Annie from Surviving Safeguarding in Camden early on, and she really helped us and develop our peer advocacy model. So those three areas, the local context in Camden, international examples, and then parents with lived experience that were operating on a national platform and developing their own approaches and supporting parents nationally. So those were the three inspirations. And perhaps I should talk about the community element in Camden. So we came together for coffee mornings a long time ago. I think it was 2014, perhaps 2013, 14. And so I organised some coffee mornings, old school really, invited people in that had experience of the child protection system, parents mainly, but others as well, grandparents, kinship carers. And they would come to this group and discuss their experiences and talk about the system. And we wanted their feedback about various elements of our social work practice in Camden, and it was a really effective learning space for that. And then through the course of time, we embarked on this co-design project, which was called Camden Conversations. And this was the thing that was the real catalyst for the lived experience work, because Camden Conversations was bringing together or listening to 25 parents and 25 professionals in Camden. And we had some peer researchers that were doing the asking the questions, parents, and Annie from Surviving Safeguarding, who I mentioned earlier, and also Professor Anna Gupta from Royal Holloway supported and scaffolded this co-design process. And so the idea was to ask the question, how could we improve child protection locally in Camden? And the answer that came back and was the top answer of something that would help and would help parents, also would help professionals, was having advocacy in child protection conferences, and particularly lived experience advocacy, peer parental advocacy. So having been a recommendation of this Camden Conversations process, we set about implementing it in Camden. We developed a learning program in London. We were supported by the London Learning Partnership and colleagues there, and we secured some training, OCN accredited training, to train the advocates. We prepared the ground by talking to the child protection chairs, by circulating information to social workers, by doing lots of presentations and warming the context for this new approach. And we developed it. And what we really needed were parents, obviously, the ones that wanted to step up and be advocates. We decided we were going to pay the advocates, the peer parental advocates, and we paid them. We had a framework for paying them because my service over a long period of time had employed freelance Found a Good conference facilitators and community organisers. So we used that framework in order to pay the advocates. We felt that was important that they were paid, and we developed the service. And the way that it looked on the ground was a simple process in a sense, and you can, Clive unpacks it in his presentation and the logic models and the realist evaluation that he did, and it's really worth looking at that research in detail. But in essence, it's a three-stage process: the advocacy, preparation, coming alongside the parent, so the peer parental advocate coming alongside the parent that needs the support, and that is the subject of the advocacy. Then that advocate moving into the child protection space, supporting the parent in the sort of cliche terms to sort of get their voice heard. And then finally to debrief. So you've got this cycle of preparation, meeting, debrief. And I think because in peer parental advocacy, you're working across some of the traditional inverted commas emotional boundaries around the advocacy work. So it's more it's not unbounded, but it's the boundaries and the emotional context is different, obviously, for peer parental advocacy. We really felt that you need quite a boundaried process. So having that 3-stage of preparation, supporting meeting and debrief feels like it's a good way to help it feel contained and doable for advocates. And there's a need to be alive to the ways in which there can be mission creep and the work can grow. So I think keeping the focus on the advocacy in the meetings was really key for me. How do I think that it can work more widely in the family justice system? I think there's a real need when you look at going back to the international context. You can see that where trust breaks down between individuals and professionals on an individual basis, that obstructs helping relationships. It also impairs the ability of child protection professionals to protect children if there isn't the trust there with parents and with community. And then you can see on a wider systemic level when trust is broken down, and we can see those instances in the US, in New Zealand, in Australia, where trust has broken down, and you can get large scale protests, movements, community movements, and protests against local authorities and against institutions. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that start, and it's on the rise. But we haven't seen that large scale in the UK yet. And I think one of the ways to build trust into the system is to acknowledge the importance of lived experience and to open up our child protection systems, family justice systems, and to more learning and the human resource of lived experience advocacy.
Hello, so my name is Carmen. So I'm a parent with lived experience of the child protection systems, and I now work with community. So I work in between community, local authority, and university. So that I work as a coordinator for the Camden Family Advisory Board, and I also a parent advocate, and I do research, and I'm also deliver training to parent advocates in other local authorities. So that gives me a closer view of what parents go through and what really helps them to take part in the child protection process. So in my advocacy work, I meet many parents who feel as they were walking on eggshells from the start, and they worry that one wrong word that will be misinterpreted and led to something else. So they hold back, and when you feel like that, it becomes really difficult to speak openly and also to take in informations also who you really are. So what this approach offer is a sense of steadiness, safety, and it gives parents someone who understood the process and can explain things and can help them to stay grounded, and so they are not facing everything on their own. So I was reminded of this recently when I attend a child protection conference to represent a parents who could not be there. So sitting in that room brought back those loneliness I felt 13 years ago. So it's one I feel like one voice in a room full of criticisms. And even though this time I was there in as a like professional work role, so but the same feelings coming back. It reminds me how exposed parents can feel, and it's daunting in that space. This is why I think the emotional side of advocacy matters just as much as the practical side. So, and having someone next to you, sit next to you, it settle that nerve and sees the sense of being outnumbered. So I think that is really important. And you could also see the change in parents' behavior as well. So they move from short and really careful to reply to speaking more openly about their situations and needs and the intentions. So professionals start to see the persons is rather than that only crisis in front of them from the paper, from all these report. So when you see this change, and I think collaborations become more possible in that space. So the research also echo this. For what I feel is the trust sits at the heart of the process, and parents they open up when they feel understood and also feel safe to speak. So also my experience, my lived experience help because they know that I recognize what those moments feels like, and I understood them, and so that trust formed. Once this started and the whole process become more manageable, so it is really crucial ingredient about the trust in these relationships. So this approach, I think also it strengthens participations. So when the parents feel safe and they be more openly to ask questions, listens, and share information. So when professional make room for this voice, for that voice, for parents' voice, so that the whole atmosphere is shift. And I have seen cases they close with absolute joy, real joy with parents and professionals thanking each other, praise each other of their work and their support. So those moments shows what is possible when everyone pulls in the same directions. So this is, I think, is really working together rather than like in normally they seems like working against each other, but it shouldn't be. It should be a place to work together. And I also want to say this, when we focus on child's well-being, and we must also consider the parents' well-being. So we cannot separate the two. And a child cannot thrive when the parents is frightened, overwhelmed, and feeling unheard and be alone. So supporting parents is part of supporting the child as well. So they are equally important in this space. And I see the long-term impact as well. So some of the parents I support with now joining the family advisory board I coordinate. They want to be trained as advocates themselves and support other parents. So we can see the positive impact this has on people when they feel respect and they have better experience, you know. I think this kind of support should be embedded across all local authorities. When parents have this human support, their outcomes could improve and trust improve, relationships improve, and at last is the children who will benefit from a more humane process. So I think the parental advocacy is important in the child protection work. Yes. Thank you.
So our peer parental advocacy and support group, the Dandelion Group, has been in place for over 4 years now. So we are kind of well ahead in terms of our journey together. There will be some resources shared so you can kind of learn more about that process. But we started by listening, very much referencing to the discussion that Tim had, and listening and being open to hearing the difficult truth of a system and what that actually has meant for families, without blame, without being defensive, and really listening to that. And what really came across was the passion in the room to make a difference for families, from our Dandelion parents and from the group as a whole. And that's where the Dandelion Group grew really. But we also had the systems advocacy in the background to scaffold practice. So we have joint training with our Dandelion peer advocate members for IROs, practitioners, bringing people with lived and learned experience together to make the system better. And also we've incorporated things like the parent report for conference to work alongside the advocacy process. And really thinking around, one of the changes that we made very early on is we've removed the confidential section from our child protection conference to aid that transparency, to aid that discussion from the get-go, and to really, with the aim that hopefully you wouldn't need the child protection process, because we should be working with families with the least interventionist approach possible. But when you are in that process, for it to be effective, for it to be supportive, strengths-based, identifying the non-negotiables of plans to keep children safe, but not just a list of tasks without meaning, really co-creating a family plan that is much more likely to be effective in terms of supporting children and supporting families, and really understanding that if to fully understand the lived experience of the child, you have to understand the lived experience of the parent. They are not two separate entities. And then having an advocate in the room, the kind of future orientated possibility that you can, your current situation is not your final destination. You can grow, you can progress, you could be the next advocate, but then to have somebody sitting alongside you, very much to echoing what Carmen said, in terms of who has been in a similar position, who understands and really enables the parent to have their own voice. That is the aim of advocacy, enables that voice to come to the fore for plans to be effective and family-led. And then thinking around how you, if a plan is not being effective, how you bring people together to support that plan. And then if you are going into the court arena, so the pre-proceedings arena, really making sure that that PLO process, so the public law outline process, has the best possible chance of success. That's what the process is for. And again, the Dandelion Group co-created a journal to support parents through that process, very much being seen as the process being a journey of growth rather than the punitive kind of process that sometimes it is viewed to be, that you can make changes in that process. So really thinking around the spaces that are opening up to bring people with lived experience together with senior leaders, with practitioners, to really make change, that joint training. So our Dandelion parents also provide home visit training, mock conference training for our practitioners. And then our next aim really is to support the kinship advocacy offer. So supporting kinship carers who are going through the assessment process. And again, helping them navigate that at a time that is incredibly difficult, the right information at the right time, being transparent. Because again, for them to have the best possible chance to care for children, they need to have information that is accessible at the right time for them to be able to act upon it and to take it in. So I would say the benefit of the local authorities, all of our aim is to keep children together. That is our aim. That's what we're working towards. Having a peer parent support model, whichever way that might work for your localized setting, brings about more family-led plans, more children being able to be sustained in their family network, and learning together to really create that localized change that has a legacy to it for the next generation of parents. That would be my I could speak for ages, but that would be my initial thoughts there. And I think
Thank you so
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Louise, and thank you to Carmen and to Tim for giving us a really practical and insight into their learnt experience of implementing peer-parent advocacy approaches. And what I'm hearing is that there really is a movement, the way in which change sort of seeps through every layer of a local service and system. We started to hear about outcomes, we've started to hear about impact, and I'm certainly hearing that there is a real potential for transformative impact here. And we've got lots of questions coming through in the chat for the panel. So we're going to move to that now, and I'm going to group them for you. And if the panel can keep their responses to just a couple of minutes, we'll be able to get through some of those different areas of interest to our audience. So firstly, there are a number of questions around the practicalities involved in setting up peer-parental advocacy in local authorities, and a question about how commonly these approaches are being used. And is there a readiness conversation to have with local authorities, thinking about their understanding of lived experience and co-production? So some reflections on that, on local authority readiness, what it takes to set up a service, and how commonly are these being used? Tim, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, well, you heard in our case, it started with a group. I think if you're growing lived experience approaches, then starting with a group of people, because I think often individuals have got are moving at different speeds, or maybe want different things. So some people in the group, the coffee morning group that became the family advisory board that at first I coordinated and then Carmen took on, is some of them were just really interested in the solidarity and the sharing of the group and coming along to the group. And then some of them wanted to become advocates. Some of them were interested in moving into different roles. And so there is a difference there. So I think actually starting with that group, if you have it, or finding the people that want to do this work and want to get involved. I think advocacy is not just about local authority grown advocacy, it's partly about system advocacy, and it is a wider movement. And there's people on this call that are in the chat that are doing advocacy in different ways. They're calling for transparency, they're highlighting practices in their local authority that they want to change. And I think that kind of system advocacy that verges on campaigns and activism is also important. So there's a role of a range of different things, but you do need a culture. You need social workers that are prepared to be a bit vulnerable and listen to people who've lived experience. And you need some of the mechanisms inside the local authority and key people in the local authority to be in the team that are moving this forward together. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. And Louise, I wonder if you might reflect on your experience with Telford and Wrekin about that sort of key buy-in and what it means to develop a service like the Dandelions.
Yeah, very briefly, we scaffold a lot of the work before parents even came together. So thinking about your practice model, thinking about your language. So I implemented a language guide in respect to my local authority to really reflect how we're speaking to, recording about and referring to parents' behaviours, things like that. So you've got to have that kind of scaffolding and a very strong practice model first. And then bringing people in. So I was one of the first social workers in the local authority to meet with the group, gain that trust. I'm also fortunate that I'm in a leadership position, so I can open up those spaces there. But then really thinking about who else you need to bring on the journey. And as Tim referenced to, you will have particular people in the workforce who are very passionate and can be the champion and can take that back into their teams. So start off very, very small and then grow and grow and grow. And now we're at the point where the Dandelion parents and practitioners are co-delivering training together. But it does take time, it takes trust, and it takes a lot of time and commitment from everybody, really, both the parents and their expertise. This couldn't be done without the parents and their expertise and the time that they give. And then the structure around it and the therapeutic support for them as well has been really important in my local authority.
Thank you, Louise. You're really giving us a sense of starting somewhere very small. In fact, that first cup of coffee, Tim, that you reference, and building from there, and how important that is. There's a few questions reflecting on some of the tensions in practice that you've noted, and that also has been picked up in the research. Somebody asked, how can we show social services to let in and trust parents who help and support other parents with peer support based on our own experiences? How do we shift some of those practice norms? Carmen, would you like to reflect on that?
I think we need local authority need to start to listen to people and open up the space. But how we do it, I think we have colleagues in local authority, people like him, they will have this passion and they need to do it something within to advocate this voice and to let the managers know. So we need some seeds. I always use the Star Wars metaphors. So everyone has some vision, some wishes, the thoughts. They want to do something that we need to start everyone to do something within or external. But when the time comes, then just like the family advisory board, we just as the right time and at the moment as well, then we got this opportunity to come together and we could start amplify this voice and start to do something with the projects. The FAB group has been running for 12 years. And we start from very small, start from conversation, and then we start to do many different activities and meet social workers, different social workers, and meet directors to talk. And we have this opportunity to open dialogues, to communicate. I think communicate is the real vehicle. You have the chance to communicate and then to understand each other's, for parents to understand what the professional side of what's their difficulties, and where they will also understand what parents' feelings. And this is how we build our work. Like myself, I'm going in the office, I could see directors running around, and I will also go say hello, and we have the relationship. We can openly talk without so many barriers, different layers of hierarchies of stuff that in between to stop this. I think so the conversation, the communication is crucial in that. So we need to find that gaps to open this space. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Carmen. And it brings us to some questions around the potential for peer parental advocacy. And Clive and Tim, I wonder if you might come in on this. What is the learning for other parts of the system? For example, should peer advocacy sit alongside the role of the parent solicitor? Or indeed, is there a role for advocacy services in relation to pre and post adoption work? Any reflections on its potential? And finally, a question around the fit of peer parent advocacy in relation to the current reform agendas to children's social care. What is the potential and opportunity?
Yeah, shall I reply to that a little bit? Adoption isn't something that we've actually thought about a lot. I mean, obviously, I think there should be, we would obviously think that adoption is very much the last resort, and that parents in that situation should be provided with lots of therapy and support and help. And maybe peer advocacy. I mean, I guess what I'd say is our research where parent advocacy is offered to parents at an earlier stage, it's much more powerful and much more effective, even at child in need level. I think, much earlier, where it's been offered at a later stage, which we have seen in some places, PLO or court, it sometimes feels like it's almost too late. There's so much distrust. The relationship is so adversarial, so difficult between parents and social workers. So I'd say that the sooner it can be introduced at the earliest, like child in need or definitely child protection, the better. I don't know, Tim. I think reunification is really important. There's a project that we're working with in the north of England that have done a lot of work around reunification and parent advocacy, and that's made a big impact and helped children go home safely. So that's really interesting. We want to do more work on that. Tim, I don't know whether you've got any other views on that.
Yeah, we did have some advocates that did move the advocacy in Camden, and also the advocacy that we're developing in London Borough of Redbridge is focused on the Child Protection Conference. So it's like preparing, attending and supporting, and then debriefing. So it's on that like 3-stage cycle. But we did, some advocates did move into the care proceedings and into the court process in Camden. But I think it's a space that, to say that I wouldn't want to say that it's more complex, but there are different dynamics there, and always thinking about the roles and how the roles meet together, and whether there's any overlapping or misunderstandings about the peer advocacy role. And I think that plays into the other question about the national reforms. I know that the current reforms and London Borough of Redbridge, who we're working with on developing advocacy there, they've been a trailblazer, a pathfinder on the reforms. And so the shifting sort of practice, the different setup of the teams, the change in the child protection chair's role, the lead child protection practitioner role, all of these things have actually opened up a space for advocacy there. So if the services and the structures of the teams are rebalancing, then advocacy can be a balancing factor in favour of a more relational, more participative process for parents. So I think it's a significant opportunity, and I know others in the chat have referenced that. I wanted to say and reiterate that I think those of you in the chat that are saying, we need independent, what is independent advocacy? And they see this as these models being grown internally by local authorities. I think there's a fair argument there, and there are lots of really good advocacy organisations and pioneers in the field, both individual parents that have been activists and advocates over a long period of time, and also organisations that have done that role in the post-adoption space as well.
You can find out more about the research presented and about peer parent advocacy services through the links below. And if you would like to sign up to receive our regular bulletins, which contain information on our latest research and upcoming events, you can do so at nuffieldfjo.org.uk/subscribe.